The day the calls started was unremarkable in nearly every way. I arrived home just after 5 in the evening, the hour at which I normally unhinge the front door and let the weight of labor drip off my shoulders as I collapsed into the sanctity of routine. The mailbox held nothing but the usual: 2 envelopes, one for the power company, one for a subscription I couldn't remember signing up for. The trees outside my house on Cedar Vista Drive swayed in an indifferent wind, the neighbors' kids shouting and ringing doorbells up and down the street. If I were a stranger watching from across the lane, I would have assumed everything was normal. It wasn't. It started with the first call, just a whisper of static at 7:15 p.m. I had been standing in the kitchen, rinsing out mugs, absently thinking about the email I needed to send for tomorrow's meeting. The landline rang, something I found mildly irritating because, ever since cell phones took over, landlines were a relic. I frowned, set the mug in the dishwasher, and answered. "Hello?" I said. Silence. Then the click of a line, and I hung up. I stared at the phone for a moment. I didn't see how it came from someone I recognized. No caller ID, just private number. I shrugged and went back to watch a sitcom rerun on the living room TV. At 8, it happened again. Ring. I ignored it. A minute later, ring. Another minute, ring. I answered, a heavy breath, indistinct, then nothing. I reported it to myself, small, odd, but manageable. Then the third call came at 9, only this time I heard something more. A faint voice, distant and rasping. "Hey," it said. "Who is it?" I asked. Silence. Then, "Hey," again, like someone hoarse and afraid. My heart rate picked up. Look, I know where you are," the voice said. I froze. I stared at my living room wall. The TV still played in the background. "Who is this?" I demanded, standing up. A click, and the line went dead. My hands shook. I set the phone back in its cradle. My throat felt dry. I thought maybe I should call the police, but I also thought maybe it was a prank, someone messing with me because I lived alone, because I'd told someone at work that I take calls on a landline. I tossed the thought aside. I told myself I should call the phone company, but instead I unplugged the handset. I lay in bed that night, lights out, half listening for anything. The groan of pipes, the wind in the trees, the distant hum of cars on the highway. I told myself, no more calls. I'll sleep. I closed my eyes. At precisely 2:17 a.m., the phone on a table next to me buzzed. My cell. The screen displayed an unknown number, but it wasn't marked private. I froze before answering. "Hello," I whispered. "Look out your window," said the voice. My breath caught. I sank down, sliding toward the wall behind me. "What do you want?" I asked. "You're so close," the whisper said. "You don't even," and then the line cut off. My blood felt cold in my veins. I sat in the darkness, silent, listening. The house felt different now. Not safe. I pulled the curtains aside, staring into the blackness of the front yard. I strained to see the shapes of tree limbs, the faint outline of where the driveway met the sidewalk. Nothing moved. At least, nothing I could see. I didn't sleep again the rest of the night. By morning, I had a decision. I'll tell someone, and I did. I called up my friend Jenna and said, something's wrong. She came over right after noon. Usually we hung out on Fridays, but today she looked alert, worried. When I recounted the calls, she said basically what I felt. This is weird. We both agreed to check the house, so we opened every door, checked every window. Nothing. No sign of forced entry. The lock's fine. The glass panes intact. I called the phone company. They said there was nothing unusual from their end, no recorded calls coming from weird numbers, no pattern. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. That evening, I decided I'd not let fear rule me. I set the landline aside and went about my dinner. But at 7:03 p.m., the landline rang again. Caller ID, private number. I answered with a voice steadier than I felt. "You?" I said. The other side breathed. "Look where you sleep," said the voice. My heart pounded. My vision blurred. I looked toward the bedroom door, saw light leaking out from underneath. It had been off. My nails dug into the phone. "Who is this?" I repeated. "No need," said the voice. "You see, I don't want you to think you're alone." That was it. Then click. I hung up. I sat in my kitchen and Jenna called me. She'd checked on the general area. Nothing. She said I should maybe stay over at her place. I ignored it at first. My pride, my space. But eventually I packed a bag and drove over to her apartment in town. She greeted me at the door with mugs of tea and a concerned look. "Good choice," she said. "I don't like this." I slept on her couch. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a strange sound. Metal scraping on concrete. Slow, deliberate. I sat up, heart thudding. In her living room window, the blinds drifted slightly. I froze. I thought it was the wind. Could have been. But then, footsteps. Outside. They stopped a moment, then moved away. My eyes flicked to the clock. 3:46 a.m. I listened, my breathing loud in my ears. Morning came. I told Jenna I was going home, but I didn't want to stay longer. I packed more carefully this time, stuffed essentials into the car. I drove home in the morning light, looking at every side street, every overhang, every patch of darkness. I got inside. I locked the doors. I leaned my back against one and exhaled. Then at 11:17 a.m., the landline rang inside the house. Not my cell. I froze. How could it? I wasn't even there. What the hell? I whispered. I let it ring until the answering machine picked up. I didn't check. That afternoon, I called my mom, told her I might be staying with Jenna for a while. She sighed, told me to stay safe. I said I would. At dinner, I made a salad. I turned on the TV. Everything seemed okay until 8:08 p.m. The cell pinged. Unknown number. I answered. You're running? Said the whisper. But you can't run forever. No, I said. You don't know what you're talking about. I know everything, the voice rasped. I'm right outside. Click. I dropped the phone. I bolted upright, looked out the window. The yard was dark and still. I pulled back the curtain. I stared. Nothing. The neighbor's cat wandered past. I exhaled. But then I noticed something. On the porch. A figure. I squinted. It was tall. No facial features. Just a coat, hood up. It looked at me. And then it turned and walked off down the driveway. I stared, frozen. Then I backed away from the window. Jenna insisted I let her call the police. I didn't want that, felt severe, but for once I relented. She called. They said they would send a patrol car. When they arrived, I told them everything. They took notes. They asked questions. They walked the perimeter. No signs of entry. No prints. No disturbances. Could be a prank, one of them said. It doesn't feel like a prank. I said quietly. They left. I stayed the night at Jenna's again. The next morning I returned home. I didn't want to go in alone, but I also felt I needed to reclaim things. I unlocked the door, felt shaky. Inside, nothing seemed changed. I surveyed each room. I shut all the blinds. I locked the windows. I paced, uneasy. Around midday, I stepped outside to get weeded out some plants in the backyard. I didn't see anything odd at first. Then I found a small footprint in the mulch. One footprint. Perfect outline. It was small, like a sneaker, size maybe 7 or 8. Could have been one of the kids from 2 doors down, but none of them had been back there, I was sure. I knelt and examined the print. It led toward the fence, then seemed to vanish. I looked at the fence, no gap. I looked at the side yard. No footprints. I photographed it on my phone, then filled the mulch over with fresh soil. I felt exposed. That evening, I decided to stay home, alone, in a kind of defiance. I cooked dinner, closed off the world, I locked the doors, I sat on the couch, the TV played, then the landline rang at 9:33 p.m. I didn't answer, but after a moment I got up, walked to the phone, hovered my finger over the receiver. I answered. You saw the footprint, the voice said. Calm, controlled. My skin crawled. Don't move, it said. How do you know? I said. My voice trembled. I told you I know everything. I didn't respond. Now you'll see something else. Click. The lights in the living room flickered. I hit the wall switch. They stayed on. I thought maybe power surge. Then the TV shut off mid-scene. The room went black except for the faint glow from the kitchen window. I froze. Then a thump against the front door. Low, heavy. Something pushed. The doorknob rattled. My limbs heavy, I crawled across the couch to reach for the phone, to call 911. But then the door handle turned slowly. I saw the knob turn and the door crack. A sliver of light from the hallway stretched across the living room. Then a figure stood there, tall, dark, hooded. No features visible. It moved slowly. I couldn't breathe. I froze utterly. In an instant, it stepped back, the door shut without a creak, and the house was silent again. The figure gone. I screamed. I grabbed my keys and ran out of the house, into the driveway, into my car, with doors slamming, the windscreen wipers on the windshield pounding with rain that had started to fall. I sped away, turning onto the street and driving until the houses looked unfamiliar. I stayed 3 nights at Jenna's. I decided I'd sell the house. I told the realtor, but I also called one of the engineers from the phone company and asked him to check wiring, phone lines, even internet cables. He came next morning. He found nothing abnormal. The house appeared untouched. wires intact, no weird endpoints. Still, I felt the walls closing in. On night 4, after I moved back in temporarily to get mail and sort paperwork, I sat in the living room with all lights on. The phone rang at 11:45 p.m. I answered. The voice said, "Tonight you don't run." In the background, I heard heavy breathing, then something else, a scraping noise, closer than before. "Turn around," the voice whispered. I did. I turned and saw a man standing behind me, very close. I gasped. The phone fell. I scrambled backward. I hit the floor and scrabbled under the coffee table. The figure didn't move. The breathing echoed. Then it stepped out. I closed my eyes. I heard a click. The door unlocked. I rolled over and ran out the front door. I looked back once. The figure stood in the doorway, silent. Then it stepped away and disappeared into the night. I drove straight to the house of my parents, somewhere else completely, and stayed there until the sale went through. I didn't sleep much. I jumped at shadows, any creak in the house. I tried to convince myself it would end when the new owners moved in. It didn't end. Weeks later, after the house had sold, I got a letter, handwritten. No return address. Inside were 3 words: "We're watching always." My blood ran cold. I shredded the letter. I deleted its image. I did everything I could. But then one night, I could swear I felt someone standing at the foot of my parents' bed. My mom and dad asleep, oblivious. I blinked. No one there. But I smelled the scent of rain and asphalt, the same scent I remembered from the night I fled my house. I froze. The next day, I found a tiny footprint on the doormat of their house. Same size, same pattern. Muddy. I stared. Then I posted a photo on social media, not a full post, just a story with a timestamp. Got this outside my folks' place. One friend messaged me, "Be careful." Another suggested cameras. I installed them. 2 on the driveway, 1 by the door. Infrared, motion detect. On the first night, nothing. On the second, at 2:07 a.m., I got an alert. Movement in my parents' driveway. I pulled up the video. A figure walked onto the driveway, hovered near the side of the house. Camera's infrared glowed. The figure looked up at the camera for a moment, face concealed, stood motionless. Then it reached into its pocket, produced something small, and flicked it toward the house. A faint sound of plastic hitting concrete. The figure turned and walked away. The timestamp 2:07. Exactly the minute I used to get calls. I felt sick. I contacted police again and filed a report with the video. They said they'd investigate. But after weeks, nothing. No leads. One afternoon, I visited the town library for something. History of the area. I stumbled across an old case. A family lived in what used to be this neighborhood decades ago. They had been stalked, harassed for months, then abruptly left. No arrests. I read in the microfilm, anonymous calls, figures seen, footprints in mulch, family fled, house sold. My pulse raced. Everything matched. Muddy footprints, calls, figures. Later, I pieced things together. The figure had followed me from the old house. It had tracked me. It wasn't random. It wasn't just a prank. It was obsession. Then I got the last call. My cell lit up at 3:03 a.m. I answered. "Tonight we claim what's ours," the voice whispered. "You thought you left." Click. 3 days later, I found my new apartment had been broken into. The front door slightly ajar. Nothing stolen, but the walls were defaced. One word scrawled on the opposite wall in black marker: "Never safe." I packed up and moved again, farther from the city. Changed my number, got rid of the landline. But sometimes I still get calls, always at 2:07 a.m., always silent. I don't answer, I hang up. Sometimes the number is unknown, sometimes it's a private line. I don't know where the figure is. I've never seen the face. I don't even know what it looks like. All I know is it found me. It wanted me, and I can still feel its eyes when I walk the street at night. The imprint of stolen presence on my life. So I live differently now. Always lights on. Doors locked. Curtains drawn. I won't get comfortable because this thing, whatever it is still out there. Story the end. It was a low-rent motel off the interstate, halfway between nowhere and nowhere better. I had stopped there only because I needed sleep. Something cheap, a bed where I could crash, nap, and hit the road again in the morning. It was nearing midnight when I pulled in. I paid in cash. The clerk at the desk gave me an all right nod and handed me a key. Room 12. A plain door. The kind of place where you hear yelling through the walls, the HVAC rattles, and the smell of old cigarette smoke lingers in the cracks of the ceiling tiles. I tossed my bag on the bed, locked the door, and let out a heavy sigh. The road had been long. The highway had stretched in front of me like a dull gray ribbon, day after day. I hadn't slept properly since the accident. Ever since the car spun out and the windshield shattered, the world felt like it was still vibrating. I'd convinced myself to pull over here and rest. My phone was mostly on emergency mode, battery low, service spotty, but I double-checked the door lock and drifted off. Sometime after 2 a.m., the air conditioner shuddered violently, rattling the window frame like a freight train. I opened my eyes. The glow from the hallway light spilled in under the door. I sat up and clicked on the bedside lamp. The bed creaked under me, and the motel felt quiet except for that HVAC and a distant drip, maybe the sink down the hall. Then I heard it, a muffled crying from somewhere else, beyond the thin wall, maybe the room next door. It was soft, as if someone held back the sobs. I went still, listening. I wasn't sure if it was real or I'd just imagined it. I got up and leaned against the door. Quiet. No footsteps. I tried to listen again. Nothing. I shrugged and went back to the bed, rolled onto my side, but the crying started again, more clearly. Now it sounded like a woman's voice, shaky, choked. I sat up again, heart beginning to beat a little faster. I walked toward the door and peeked through the peephole. Nobody, just the hallway. I cracked the door open a little. The smell hit me. Stale smoke, rotting metal, damp carpet. The corridor was deserted. I stepped into the hallway. The crying stopped. The corridor light flickered overhead, casting long shadows. I stood for a moment. Was it in room 11? Room 13? I pressed my ear to the door beside the motel. Room 13. No sound. Then room 11. I tried the knob. It was locked. I pressed my ear to the door. Then I heard it again. A whimper, soft but distinct. A woman's voice, whispering something like, "Help me." I froze. I turned back to my door and looked around the hallway. It was still empty. The front desk closed for the night. The sign at the door still said office, but behind it the blinds were pulled. I considered going back to bed, telling myself it was nothing. My phone buzzed, low battery, 10%. I glanced at the screen. 4:12 a.m., I groaned. Still hours to go until dawn. The crying came again, this time louder, agonizing. I felt something in my chest like a hand gripping. I knew I shouldn't get involved, but the voice, the desperation, I couldn't ignore. I stepped out of the corridor and quietly walked toward the stairwell at the end of the hall. The stairwell door creaked when I opened it. I flicked the light, but the bulb buzzed weakly. I climbed down one flight, expecting the parking area or maybe some service door. I didn't see any sign. Instead, I saw a door that said maintenance, partially open. I hesitated, but pushed it gently. The crying echoed from inside. I steeled myself and entered. The room was long, narrow, used for storing old mattresses and cleaning supplies. At the far end, I made out a silhouette of a woman crouched against the wall, arms around her knees, hair hanging loosely. I stepped closer until a piece of broken overhead light flickered and illuminated her face. She looked pale, eyes shadowed, tears carving tracks down her cheeks. I said, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Her hair parted, and I caught a brighter flicker of red in the hallway light across the door behind me. She didn't respond at first. She just looked up at me, eyes hollow. Then she whispered the name. "Please, don't let him in." My skin prickled. I asked, "Who?" She shook her head. I motioned for her to stand and come with me. She slowly rose, legs shaking. I offered my hand. She took it. "We should go back to the lobby and get help," I told her. She nodded. I turned toward the door, but as I moved, the hallway light outside flickered violently. I heard a firm, heavy step on the landing above us. There was a male voice, low but unmistakable. "What are you doing in there?" the voice said. The woman jerked. I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight on the screen. The sound repeated. Footsteps descending the stairs. The man had to be coming down. And we were in this narrow maintenance room with no easy exit except back up the stairs. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I whispered, "We need to go now." The woman nodded. We hurried toward the door. I flicked the handle. Locked. Some kind of latch. I shoved it hard. The man's footsteps grew louder. We turned back. The shelves of mops and chemical drums loomed like silent guards. I grabbed a broom and held it like an awkward weapon. The door rattled as someone began to push from the outside. I glanced at the woman, eyes frantic. "Go," I hissed. She ducked behind me. The door burst open and a tall figure stood there. Tall, heavy-built, wearing a dusty jacket, face hidden in the shadows of the stairwell light. He looked at us, the beam from the phone flashlight shining across his face. His eyes, though dim, locked with mine. He had a sick grin. I felt bile rise in my throat. "What were you doing with her?" he said. "She followed me," I said, voice shaking. "She asked for help." "Did she?" He stepped forward with a heavy stride, making the chemical drums clatter. The smell of bleach and something rotten filled the air. The woman cried and started to try to step past me, back to the stairs. I swung the broom at him. Fortunately, he was taken aback for a moment and raised his arms. Capital chance. The woman and I bolted. We turned and ran back up the stairs. The man shouted behind us, oozing anger. We flew up the stairs 2 flights, turning a corner into the hallway. I pounded on the door of room 12, unlocked it, slammed my bag inside, pulled her in, locked the door from inside. Then I jammed the wedge of my phone under the knob handle. She collapsed onto the bed, crying uncontrollably. I locked the door again, breathing hard, sweat cold on my forehead. I ran to the air conditioner window and cracked it open a little, listening. I heard heavy steps on the stairs, then nothing. Then the hallway light outside our door flickered, and I saw the shadow of the man moving slowly past the door, pausing by room 11, then shuffling on. We stayed in that room for what felt like hours. I kept my phone light on and texted my sister. "Call the police, state troopers. There's someone here." Service was weak, but I managed to send off a message. Finally, the man walked away. The crying woman sat up and looked at me. "Thank you," she whispered. "Who was that?" I asked. She stared at the floor and said, He lived here. He came back." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I stayed here a few nights ago. He, tenant in room 13. He lost his job. I heard him yelling. Then a week later he vanished. Management said he didn't renew. But I always heard him in the walls, footsteps, the window rattling. I thought it was the wind." She swallowed hard. "Tonight I woke up and heard him coming down the stairs. I locked myself in the maintenance room." I looked at her. "And then you cried for help." "Yes." "He found me." We heard rattling on our door again. The knob turned slowly, then stopped. I grabbed the dumbbell weight from the bag. I'd packed one for pressing, of all stupid things. I held it like a brickbat. The knob rattled again, louder. It felt like the motel rent-by-day business of nightmares. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. I saw the man's dark coat, the face mostly in shadow, eyes glinting. He yanked at the door handle. My heart pounded. Then, after what felt like forever, he let go and walked away. The hallway light clicked on and off, the muffled sound of a door shutting. I said, "We have to get out now." She nodded. I gathered my bag. The phone battery was down to 4%. I shoved the dumbbell into the bag, locked the suitcase. I ordered her, "Stay quiet. I'll go ahead and check." I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The light was steady now. Room 13 door opened slightly. I crept and peeked inside. The door to room 13 had inner side curtains parted just enough. Inside it looked dark, but I saw clothes strewn about, a bed unmade. On the dresser lay a broken mirror. Then something caught my eye. 2 long metal strips lying on the floor next to the dresser, handcuffs. I froze. The man must have dropped them. I ducked back into the hallway and motioned her over. "Look," she followed and gasped softly. "We called the police. We'll leave now." I led her barefoot down the stairs 2 flights to the lobby. The door to the motel lobby was locked from the inside. I rattled the handle. The office lights were off. Then I heard the clerk's voice yell something from behind the counter. "Hey, who's there?" I ducked behind her and said, "Police, we need help." He flicked a switch and the lights came on. A thin man in his 40s blinked at us. I pointed. "There's a man. He has an apartment here. He locked someone in the maintenance room." The clerk's face went pale. He flicked the lock and allowed the door to open. "I'm sorry," he said. "We don't allow that." He reached for a phone. I looked at the woman next to me. She was still shaking. The clerk said, "I called the sheriff." He led us out to the parking lot. The night air felt damp. The lot was deserted except for my car and a dusty pickup parked in another space. The windows rattled with the wind. We waited. 20 minutes later, we heard sirens. 2 patrol cars pulled up. Officers got out, flashlights sweeping. The man in the dark coat was gone. I described what I had heard. The footsteps, the voice, the handcuffs. The woman identified herself. She gave her name and said she was homeless for a while, jobless, drifting. She stayed at motels like this. She said the man lived in room 13 for the past 2 weeks and nobody noticed. We stood in the shadow of the lobby, watching the officers looking inside room 13. They pulled out bedding, found empty bottles, a mattress stained, handcuffs, and a cell phone with a single photo, a blurry picture of the woman from inside the maintenance room. Her hair in her face, tears in her eyes. Then a message, "You can't hide from me." The officer looked at me and said, "You did the right thing." I nodded, though I felt weak, cold. The woman collapsed to the ground. They escorted her to an ambulance. I called my sister again and told her I'd be late. She said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I'm fine." I looked back at the motel, at the single neon sign flickering. Motel 12, vacancy. The breeze rattled the sign. The parking lot light buzzed. I drove away at dawn. The sky was gray, the highway empty. I looked in the rearview mirror twice. No sign. But I could feel the memory of his gaze locked on me in that dark maintenance room. The sobbing. Weeks later, I found news online. There had been missing persons cases in small towns for years. All homeless women who stayed in motels along the interstate who vanished, sometimes turning up months later, dead. The sheriff's office had linked several to that same region. They had reopened the case of room 13 at the Motel 12. They found no sign of the man. They still haven't. I quit the road trip. I sleep differently now. At night, I lock all the doors, check every shadow. I keep a dumbbell beside the bed. Sometimes I hear a distant step outside the window. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night, pale, breathing hard, remembering that motel, the maintenance room, the handcuffs, the sobbing voice. It was unexpected. It was real. It changed me. Story the end. The summer evening had faded into that peculiar shade of gray where the last traces of daylight linger at the horizon, and the stillness feels heavy like the air before a storm. In the small town of Cedar Grove, Ohio, 28-year-old Mark Hawthorne pulled into the empty lot of an old movie theater, abandoned since the chain pulled out 2 years earlier. He was chasing a story. Mark worked for the local paper, the Cedar Grove Gazette, and though his assignments were mostly the routine, council meetings, seasonal festivals, charity dinners, he longed for something more, something real, something unsettling. He'd heard rumors that the old Palace Theater held late-night gatherings of drifters, or that someone had seen a figure peering through the dark windows when the moon was just a slender crescent. Tonight, Mark came prepared. A flashlight, a notebook, his camera. He parked his beat-up Honda Civic in front of the weather-beaten marquee, where the letters PALACE hung in disarray, only the P cracked and glowing faintly against the night. The wind filtered through broken glass, knocking the old boards in a soft staccato. Inside, the lobby was littered with grime-covered chairs and crumpled flyers of long-past films. The scent of popcorn butter, outdated and moldy, lingered in places, mixed with the wet rot of damp walls. Mark flicked on his flashlight and started across the linoleum floor, camera in hand, clicking pictures. He felt a twinge of exhilaration. Here was something no one else on his staff dared to cover. He moved toward what had once been the concession stand, now stripped bare of machines, the tile cracked and stained. As he crouched to photograph the peeling wallpaper, he heard a soft rustle behind him. Maybe a rat? He tilted his beam toward the rear stairwell leading up to the balcony, but saw nothing. Bracing himself, he ascended the stairs. Each step creaked under his weight, echoing into the high ceiling overhead. From up here, the auditorium stretched out like a cavernous shell. Rows of tattered red seats, some missing, some slumped, the screen gone, ripped away, leaving a dark void of plaster and steel framing. Mark walked to the center of the floor and shone his light upward. In the upper balcony at the far right side, he caught something. A faint movement. He paused. His heartbeat echoed in his ears. He raised his camera and zoomed in. A figure, slender, standing motionless in the shadow of the balcony's edge. He snapped a photo. The flash lit up the figure briefly. He froze. The figure vanished. His breath caught. He snapped another photo, now empty. The steel rail glinted in his flashlight beam. He told himself it was just a trick of light, a scrap of curtain, a discarded jacket that moved with the draft. Yet his instinct told him otherwise. He moved back down and headed toward the exit. But at the lobby door, he stopped. Somebody had scratched the words, "Get out, out," into the wall behind the concession counter. They were large, uneven, as if carved with a knife. Mark stared for a moment, then knelt and touched the wall. Fresh. The scratch was sharp beneath his fingers, the plaster still brittle. He took a photograph. His excitement drained away. He stood, his heartbeat now hollow in his chest. He told himself it was still fine, just a story. He stepped outside, reached his car, started the engine. But before he pulled away, he looked back at the theater. The marquee letters flickered. One by one, the lights went out except the P. He frowned. The wind lifted a plastic bag and dragged it across the lot, and in that moment he thought he saw a shadow, or maybe more accurately, heard a murmur, low and gliding across the empty space. He shook his head and pressed the gas. Back in his apartment that night, Mark scrolled through the photos, the lobby, the auditorium, the balcony with the figure he thought he saw. On the last one, zoomed in, he could make out a pale face, thin and expressionless, staring directly into his camera from the darkness of the balcony. His finger froze above the delete key. With a gulp, he backed out of the photo. He kept it. Early the next morning, he emailed his editor. Possible story, abandoned theater exhibiting strange activity. We'll investigate further tonight. His editor replied, proceed with caution. Get permission. Standard stuff. That evening, Mark returned to the theater, this time with a coworker, Cindy Torres, a young photographer keen on dark urban exploration. They arrived around 8:45 p.m., just as the sun dipped behind trees, and they climbed in through a back door that had been pried open. The door complained with a groan. The hinges rusted. Inside, the air felt colder. Cindy flicked on her handheld floodlight. Its wide beam revealed graffiti on the walls, random names and dates, some scratched deep, others painted. 1999, one read, "No one hers," another. They moved to the auditorium again. Mark noticed that one of the balcony seats, the one directly opposite the figure in his earlier photo, was rotated improperly, as though someone had pulled it out and left it turned sideways. Cindy crouched and photographed it. The floor beneath it had scattered shards of glass, perhaps from a broken window. The two glanced at each other. The adrenaline was real. They continued their exploration toward the projection booth at the rear. The booth door was ajar. Inside, rusting film reels lay scattered, a projector tilted askew. Mark clicked pictures. Under the projector, the floor had dark stains, old film adhesive, or something else. Cindy snapped a shot of the stain. As she did, she heard something behind her, a gentle tapping like fingernails on wood. She turned. Nothing. Mark placed his flashlight higher, shining into the booth corner. A figure stood there, shoulders hunched, back to them, head bowed. They froze. The figure didn't move. Then, the figure slowly turned its head, and Mark caught the glint of an eye in the beam. The thing moved away, gliding, silent, behind the projector and out of sight. They both bolted out of the booth. Cindy, pale, whispered, "We should go." Mark nodded, though his pride resisted. They made their way to the lobby and toward the exit. At the door, Mark glanced back at the theater. On the old ticket counter glass, the words, "We see you," had been traced in condensation, or maybe something darker. His skin prickled. They left. The car's engine cracked at startup as if protesting. They raced down the street. Cindy in the passenger seat turned pale and quiet. Neither spoke. Back at his apartment, Mark reviewed the photos again. The booth image. Zoom in. The figure. Thin, long limbs, pale skin, head hanging. Cindy's reflection in the glass, wide-eyed. The ticket counter photo, a vague smudge, but the letters could be seen in faint white. He sat wide awake, tossed and turned, heard strange creaks outside his window. The next morning, Mark's editor asked for a draft. Mark replied he needed more details. He booked the theater again for the next night, intending to stay until midnight. That night, he went alone. Cindy had pulled out at the last minute, citing an urgent assignment. So Mark, his camera gear and flashlight, sat in the old auditorium on the center floor row, watching. He had left the doors closed, locked behind him, rises of wind gusting outside. The small emergency exit window rattled occasionally. He set the tripod up, pointed the camera at the balcony front. He sat, waited. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. His eyelids drooped. He started to nod off. Then he heard faint giggling. Soft. Behind him. He jolted, spun around, empty row behind. He shined the flashlight. Ripples of darkness. The laughter stopped. Then came scratching on the wall behind the seats. Behind the wall? Maybe inside. He rose, palms sweating. Every rational part of him whispered to leave, but he stayed. He approached the sound. The scratches were deeper, etching into plaster. He leaned in, his flashlight beam caught the wall, symbols, odd runes, deeply gouged. The air shifted, a breeze from nowhere, the sound of footsteps overhead on the balcony catwalk. He raised the camera and snapped a photo of the balcony. He heard a whisper, "Come." He froze. The hair on his arms stood. He thought he'd imagined it, but then he heard a footpad, slow, deliberate. He glanced at his phone. It read 1:02 a.m. He backed away, eyes darting. In the balcony, a figure stood at the edge, head tilted. Then it beckoned him with a long, slender finger. Mark's breath caught. His heart pounded. He thought to run, but his legs felt rooted. The figure turned and disappeared into the shadows above. Mark exhaled. He bolted down the stairs, out the door into the night, not stopping until his car was roaring away. In the morning, he checked the photo he'd taken. There, in the balcony shot, the edge rail gleamed faintly. Behind it, in the darkness, the same pale face, closer now, almost pressing outward, its mouth a thin slit of black. Mark's hands shook. He stared at the image for a long time. The creeping dread in his chest did not go away. Over the next days, strange things began in his apartment. At first, it was small. The bedroom window that had been closed found slightly ajar. His keys moved from where he left them. A tapping at his door at 3:14 a.m. Just one knock, then silence. His eyeballs stung with fatigue, his dreamless nights replaced by restless waking. He started to doubt his own memory. Were the knocks real? Or just his mind playing tricks? Then his camera disappeared. He left it on the kitchen counter charging overnight. The next morning it was gone. In its place lay the memory card, isolated on the counter, the card his camera used, alone. He picked it up, heart sinking. The camera body missing. No sign of forced entry. He searched the apartment thoroughly. No camera, no dust prints. He tried to report it to the police, but was told he'd likely misplaced it or someone took it. The local theft rate in Cedar Grove being what it was, they offered no hope. But that evening he got a text from his phone. He couldn't remember unlocking it. "Why did you leave?" Just that. No reply. Mark felt the color drain from his face. The message, time-stamped at 11:03 p.m., came while he sat on his couch with the lights dim. He looked around, doors locked, curtains drawn. He texted back, "Who is this?" but no reply. He turned off his phone. Heart pounding. He slept the night in his car in the driveway. He could not bear to stay inside. That night, the tapping came on the window. He sat inside the locked vehicle, engine running, lights off. The sound above him, on the roof, lights scratching across metal. A movement. He dialed 911. The dispatcher came on. He tried to whisper, explain he was in his car outside his own house. The call dropped. When he looked up, nothing. When he reached for his phone, the screen had one notification, a photo. Thumbnail size. He opened it. From his apartment window, shot from outside, a figure framed in darkness, pale face, grin stretched wide. Below on the photo, timestamp 2:34 a.m., he sat frozen. He didn't stay another night. The next morning, he checked into a hotel in town. From his room, he looked at his apartment a block away. Night fell and passed. Nothing. He returned to his home, installed new locks, motion sensor lights. He thought maybe the figure was gone. He tried to go back to normal. But sleep did not come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the pale face, hear the whisper, "Come." He kept the photo on his phone, hidden in a folder. He refused to hit delete. He knew telling someone about it would invite doubt. He told his editor he was pausing the story for a while. Weeks later, Mark got a call from an older woman, Mrs. Eleanor Price, from Cedar Grove's Historic Society. She said she saw his article idea and had some information. They met at the Society's small museum. Over hot coffee, she told him that the old Palace Theater had a tragic history. In 1978, a janitor, Harold Merton, had died in a night fire in the projection booth. He was alone. The alarm system malfunctioned. The building was shut down temporarily, reopened, then closed again in 1985 when new multiplexes came in. But that fire, she said, had never been properly investigated. Some believed Merton's body wasn't fully recovered. Some locals claimed they heard someone moving around up there at night. The janitor had been described as slight, pale, thinning hair, always looking upward at the balcony. He'd once complained he felt watched. Mrs. Price handed Mark a yellowed newspaper clipping with the headline, "Janitor burned to death in late-night fire. Palace Theater investigation ongoing," dated October 2nd, 1978. He thanked her. The piece ended with a quote from a neighbor. I heard someone talking last night in the old theater, asking someone to come down. Mark's skin crawled. He felt an odd mix of relief and dread. The figure he saw and photographed, could it be Harold Merton or something else? He tucked the clipping away. He decided to return one more time once the building permit and access from the society were secured, to document the history properly. Armed with a new camera, 2 lights, and the courage his rational mind could muster. He entered the auditorium a few nights later, solo again, but with his gear and a recorder. He set up in the front row and aimed toward the projection booth. He said into the recorder, "This is Mark Hawthorne, Cedar Grove Gazette, 11/14 that year, follow-up on Palace Theater." He clicked record. The Historic Society had given him the old electrical plan for the building. He'd studied it. The projection booth was above that central wall. He sat silent, listening. Nothing. 10 minutes passed, then 15. He stood and walked slowly up the stairs toward the balcony. The seats were strewn, the house lights were off, but his lights illuminated the walkway. He reached the balcony and directed one light at the edge. The floor there was worn. One section had a small trapdoor for wiring. He pried it open with his boot. Underneath the wiring lay a narrow crawl space leading back toward the rafters. He pressed his light into the hole. It smelled of rot and old soot. He heard a soft shuffling from the crawl ahead. He crouched and switched the recorder into looming sound mode. He crawled 5 feet in. The footsteps sounded again. Something ahead. He aimed his beam. At the far end of the crawl space, just ahead, he saw the pale face. No body, just the face, floating in darkness, eyes locked on his light. His breath froze. The recorder clicked. The face moved aside, revealing an old metal grate behind it, closed. The face lingered for a moment longer and then slipped into the darkness. The grate clanged shut. Mark backed out hurriedly. As he crawled back, he felt a hand brush his shoulder. He screamed and scrambled out, bursting into the open balcony aisle. He sprinted down the stairs, ignoring his lights, tripping, stumbling, lunging for his car. He didn't stop until he reached his hotel room. He collapsed, shaking, tears in his eyes from the terror. The recorder and camera both lay on the hotel bed. He dared not review them until morning. The next day, he did. The audio. Faint scratching, then something whispering. Non-English, but one word clear. Join. The camera in the crawl space photo, the pale face closer, a body behind it in shadow, kneeling, limbs splayed. Mark's rational mind reeled. He packed up. He told his editor he had enough. He finished the piece, History of the Theater, the mysterious janitor death, the late-night sightings, the photographic evidence anonymized. The Gazette published it. The town read it. Some scoffed, some were uneasy. And then the weirdness followed him home. A week after publication, Mark received a package with no return address. Inside, a DVD labeled simply View in thick black marker. He inserted it into his computer. The screen showed the auditorium at night, empty. The camera pans slowly. Then the pale figure appears, standing on the balcony rail, arms raised. Then the camera shifts. A close-up of Mark's own face asleep in his bed, filmed from his open window. He jumps. He closes the laptop. The DVD ended. He tried to report this. He rechecked all locks, changed windows, installed cameras, a tracker, a stalker, the town. He didn't know. Late one night, months later, Mark heard a whisper in his hallway. "Come." He froze. He stared at the darkness outside his bedroom door. He reached for the phone, but it lay on the bed, uncharged. The bulb above him flickered. He pulled the blanket over his head. He heard footsteps in the hallway, soft, deliberate. They approached, paused, then turned away. He stayed under the blanket until dawn. He wrote a follow-up piece, How Fear Can Become Part of Reporting, How Sometimes Stories Don't End When the Article is Published. But inside, he feared the figure still watched him. The DVD, the photo, the whisper. They were real. One crisp autumn evening, he returned to the theater one last time, without camera, without expectation. He stood across the street in his car, headlights off, watching the old building. The marquee had collapsed. Trees were growing through broken windows. Yet from the balcony rail, he saw a dim form emerge, pale, thin. It looked his way. He sat motionless. The figure raised its hand. He drove away slowly. That image burned into him. Now, whenever Mark lies awake, he sees the pale face pressed close to him in the dark. Occasionally, the whisper echoes in his mind, "Join." He no longer works full-time for the paper. He's editing elsewhere, nocturnal, cautious. The story changed him. And in the old theater, whether anyone else looks or not, someone still sits in the balcony, watching, waiting. Story the end. It was a cold Thursday evening in late October when Lisa Carter realized she had forgotten her wallet at home. She had just finished her shift at the diner in her small Pennsylvania town and was halfway to the grocery store when it hit her. The sun had already dipped behind the hills, leaving a gray twilight that made the long stretches of country road feel isolating. Her car headlights reflected off the damp pavement as she reluctantly turned around, muttering under her breath about how careless she'd been. Pulling into her driveway, she noticed something odd immediately. The front door of her modest two-story home was slightly ajar. Her heart jumped, and she froze in the car, trying to convince herself she had just imagined it. The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet, and the evening wind seemed to whisper through the empty streets. She climbed out, her keys trembling in her hand, and pushed the door open the rest of the way. "Hello?" she called softly, her voice sounding far too loud in the quiet house. Nothing. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the living room. The couch cushions were in disarray, and the kitchen drawer where she kept her silverware was open. It was as if someone had rifled through the house, but she saw no one. Lisa reached for her phone and dialed 911, her hands shaking. The dispatcher's calm voice was a small comfort as she explained the situation. "Stay where you are," the operator said, "and do not touch anything. Officers are on their way." She walked cautiously toward the staircase, glancing at every shadow. That's when she saw it, a faint smear on the wall near the hallway. At first she thought it was dirt, but as she squinted, the smear became unmistakable, a handprint smeared in a dark, reddish color. Her stomach dropped. By the time the police arrived, Lisa was huddled in the living room, rocking slightly and muttering to herself. Officers combed the house, but there were no signs of forced entry other than the door, which they confirmed had been unlocked. There were no intruders, no fingerprints except her own, and no stolen items. They chalked it up to a possible misunderstanding, maybe a neighbor letting someone in by accident. Lisa wasn't convinced, but she tried to sleep that night anyway. Around 2:30 a.m., she woke to the sound of tapping. At first, she thought it was rain, but the pattern was deliberate, slow and steady, like someone was tapping on the window. She got up, heart racing, and peered through the blinds. The yard was empty. She forced herself back to bed, telling herself it was a tree branch. The next day was worse. Lisa found small things moved around the house, her keys, her shoes, even her favorite coffee mug. She had locked the door at night. She knew she had. She installed a few temporary locks just to feel some semblance of security, but it didn't help. Every night there was the tapping, sometimes on the windows, sometimes on the walls, sometimes it was footsteps in the attic. Lisa's friends started to notice a change in her. She became withdrawn, jumpy, constantly checking doors and windows. When she told them what was happening, they assumed she was stressed, maybe a side effect of working long hours at the diner. But she knew something was wrong. Then the letters started arriving. At first, they were just unsigned notes slipped under the door. One said, "I see you." Another said, "Don't be afraid, I'm close." Lisa showed them to the police, who reassured her it was likely a prank. But the handwriting was strained, almost childlike, with dark smudges that looked suspiciously like the handprint she had seen days before. Things escalated one night when she was home alone. She was watching TV when the power went out, not the usual flicker or surge, but a complete blackout. She fumbled for a flashlight and heard a whisper behind her. She spun around, the beam cutting through the darkness. No one was there, but she could swear she felt breath on her neck. Desperate, Lisa installed security cameras the next day. The footage was chilling. Every night around 2 a.m., the front door handle would jiggle. At first, nothing else appeared on the video, but on the third night, she saw a shadow moving through the kitchen. It didn't walk, it glided. She rewound the footage over and over, eyes straining, but the figure was faint, almost transparent. Sleep became impossible. Lisa started sleeping with the lights on, leaving the TV blaring, but the presence in the house seemed to grow bolder. She would wake to find her furniture rearranged in ways she hadn't done, and sometimes objects would vanish entirely. The worst was the tapping, now joined by scratching sounds in the walls, like claws scraping against wood. One evening, Lisa decided she had had enough. She packed a bag, planning to stay with her sister for a few nights. As she walked out the front door, she noticed a new note on the porch. Written in the same smeared, uneven handwriting were the words, "Going somewhere? Don't forget me." Panic surged through her. She ran to her car, locked the doors, and drove to her sister's house without looking back. She stayed there for a week, trying to calm down, but the nightmares followed her. Every dream was the same. She was home, the lights were off, and something was watching her from the corner of the living room. It whispered her name over and over until she woke, drenched in sweat. After that week, she felt she needed answers. Lisa hired a local paranormal investigator, a man named Gerald, who was skeptical but willing to help. He spent several nights in the house, setting up cameras, EMF detectors, and recording devices. The first 2 nights were quiet, but on the third night, the devices went haywire. EMF readings spiked, the cameras recorded static shapes moving rapidly, and the audio picked up a voice, whispering, "You can't leave me." Gerald insisted they stay through the night. Around 2 a.m., the lights flickered, the temperature dropped, and the unmistakable smell of something burnt filled the air. Gerald pointed toward the staircase. Lisa froze. At the top, the shadow appeared again. This time it was clearer. A tall, distorted figure with hollow eyes and a mouth that seemed too wide. It moved unnaturally like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. Lisa screamed. Gerald shouted instructions, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. Then slowly, it raised a hand and pointed directly at her. She felt paralyzed, unable to move. Her body screamed to run, but her legs refused. Gerald grabbed her arm and dragged her down the stairs. The figure vanished the moment they hit the living room. They called the police immediately. Officers arrived, but as usual found nothing. Gerald packed up his equipment, warning Lisa that some presences could linger, feeding off fear, growing stronger when ignored or dismissed. Lisa didn't sleep that night. She stayed awake, holding a kitchen knife, listening. At 2:07 a.m., she heard it again, the tapping on the window. She held her breath, listening, then the whisper, her name. This time, it came from the hallway inside the house. Her phone rang. It was an unknown number. She answered, trembling. A voice, low and distorted, whispered, "I'm here." Then the line went dead. Lisa ran to her car and left, driving aimlessly for hours, unsure where she was going. When she returned the next morning, the house looked normal. No handprints, no disarray, no letters. Just her home, quiet, seemingly benign. She tried to move on, but the feeling never left. At work, she would catch glimpses of shadows in mirrors, in reflections of windows, always at the edge of her vision. Her friends noticed her nervousness, her twitchy reactions. Months later, Lisa received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a small charred figurine of a woman and a note. "I waited." Terrified, Lisa contacted Gerald again. He advised her to leave town, maybe even the state, and try to break the connection. She did. She sold the house and moved to a small apartment in Ohio, hoping for peace. At first, life seemed calm. She worked at a local coffee shop, made a few friends, and even started dating again. But the tapping started again, faint at first, on her apartment windows. She told herself it was just the building settling. One night, she woke to find all the lights in her apartment flickering. The TV turned on by itself, showing static, and then a face appeared on the screen. Distorted, pale, with hollow eyes, it mouthed her name. Lisa ran out into the hallway, screaming for help. Neighbors looked at her like she was insane. When she returned, the apartment was silent again, but she knew what she saw was real. Days later, she found another note slipped under her door. "I followed you." She tried to leave, to escape, but the presence was relentless. Every corner, every reflection, every dark space seemed to hide it. No matter where she went, she could feel it. Watching, waiting. Then one evening, Lisa noticed her reflection in the mirror was slightly off. Her eyes weren't hers. They were hollow, black, with a faint glimmer of movement within them. And then the whisper, "Finally, I can see you." She backed away, falling to the floor, realizing too late that some things don't follow the rules. Some presences don't wait outside, they find a way in. Lisa hasn't been seen since that night. Her apartment was locked from the inside, her belongings untouched. The police never found any signs of forced entry, but her phone still rings at 2:07 a.m. every night, showing an unknown number. Those who answer report a faint whisper, their own name, calling them. The apartment building has remained vacant since. Locals tell stories about the girl who disappeared, warning that some fears are not just in the mind, they are waiting, patient, and hungry. Visitors claim that if you stand outside the building after dark, you can see a shadow in the top floor window staring down, waiting for the next name to call. Story the end. The summer of 2018 in Cedar Grove had been hotter than usual, the kind of heat that made the asphalt shimmer and sent the cicadas into a near-constant chorus. For 22-year-old Emily Harper, it was supposed to be her last carefree summer before starting her first real job in the city. She lived in a small, somewhat isolated neighborhood on the outskirts, where everyone knew each other's business, but privacy was a valued commodity. Her parents were away for a week-long vacation, leaving her alone in the house for the first time since she had moved back from college. Emily's friends had plans to leave town for the weekend, so she was expecting a quiet house, some movies, and plenty of ice cream. On her first night alone, she noticed something odd. The front porch light, which had been on a timer, didn't turn on. Initially, she brushed it off, thinking the bulb had burned out. She went to the garage, fumbled for the spare, and replaced it. That small act, almost insignificant at the time, would mark the first thread in a series of events that would unravel her sense of safety. The next morning, Emily went about her routine. Coffee, shower, checking emails. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She chalked it up to being alone in the house for the first time. By mid-afternoon, she was on her laptop when she noticed a movement in the backyard. A man, dressed in dark clothing, crouched near the edge of her property line, seemingly adjusting a camera on a tripod. She froze, heart hammering. The man looked up briefly, but she couldn't see his face clearly. She ducked behind the curtain and grabbed her phone. Dialing 911 felt overdramatic, but she did it anyway. The operator's calm voice told her to stay inside and keep the door locked. Emily watched from the living room window, trying to keep her breathing steady. When she peeked again, the man was gone. Minutes later, she received a text from an unknown number. "Nice house. You're alone, right?" Her stomach dropped. She showed the message to the operator, who advised her to stay on the line until officers arrived. When the police got there, the man was nowhere to be found. They chalked it up to a possible prank, left, and Emily tried to sleep, but every creak of the old house made her flinch. The following day, Emily received another message. "I like your bedroom window. Can see you from the street." Panic set in. She called the police again, who increased patrols around her neighborhood. Emily installed a couple of cheap security cameras she had bought online, but the man didn't appear on any footage. He wasn't a person she could easily identify, and yet she knew he had been there. The unease grew. She felt eyes on her constantly, even inside her own home. One evening, she decided to stay in the living room with the lights on and a baseball bat resting on her lap. She heard a soft tapping at the front door around 11 p.m. She froze. When she looked through the peephole, there was no one there, just the darkness and the swaying shadows of the trees. Her phone buzzed. Another text. "You can't hide." The line between reality and fear was blurring. Every small sound, wind against the siding, a branch scraping the window, made her heart leap. Emily began to notice things missing. Her laptop charger vanished, a few DVDs were gone, and small kitchen appliances she knew she had didn't appear in the same places. At first, she thought she was imagining things, but the sense of being watched intensified. She started sleeping with a knife under her pillow, checking every door and window multiple times before bed. Even so, the messages kept coming, each one more sinister. "I saw you today. You didn't see me, but I saw you." By the fifth night, Emily had begun hearing noises that couldn't be explained. Footsteps in the attic, whispering just out of earshot, and the faint dragging of something heavy across the hardwood floors. She knew the house was empty, or at least it should have been. Her nerves were stretched thin, and she wasn't eating much, barely sleeping. Then came the first physical encounter. She woke around 3 a.m. to the sensation of someone brushing against her bedroom door. The knob rattled lightly. Emily froze, heart pounding. She whispered into the darkness, "Who's there?" No answer. Gathering courage, she grabbed her phone and flashlight, creeping toward the door. The hallway was empty, but a trail of muddy footprints led from the living room to her bedroom door, then stopped abruptly. She snapped pictures with her phone. The footprints disappeared into thin air. The police were skeptical again. There were no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, no security camera evidence. Emily's friends suggested she might be stressed, imagining things, but the fear was real, gnawing at her sanity. She began sleeping in the living room, lights on, curtains drawn, and the baseball bat by her side. 2 nights later, she heard the whispering again, closer this time. It came from the kitchen. Emily, clutching her bat, slowly moved toward the sound. As she turned the corner, she saw a shadow slip out of the back door. Her mind screamed at her to call the police, but she was frozen in terror. She ran to the door, but outside there was nothing but the pitch-black backyard. Then she noticed her sliding glass door was unlocked. She was certain she had locked it. Emily realized she couldn't stay in the house. She called her best friend Jordan, who lived about 20 minutes away. Within the hour, Jordan was at her door, flashlight in hand, ready to help her move her things. Emily left the house with a bag of essentials, locking the door behind her. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of relief. They decided to stay at Jordan's apartment that night. Emily slept lightly, the memories of footsteps, whispers, and the faceless man's messages replaying in her mind. At dawn, they returned to the house, determined to figure out what had been happening. The moment they opened the door, the smell hit them, a metallic, coppery scent, like blood. Emily's stomach turned. In the living room, her worst fears were confirmed. Every window in the house had been painted with a thin, sticky substance, smeared in erratic patterns, almost as if someone had traced hands over them. On the wall, a message was scrawled in what appeared to be dirt or ash. "I'm inside." Panic surged. Jordan called 911 immediately, and this time the officers took it seriously. They called for backup, sweeping the house and neighborhood for evidence. Outside, they found a shallow hole in Emily's backyard, freshly dug, barely hidden beneath the overgrown grass. Despite the intense search, the intruder was never found. Forensic teams couldn't find fingerprints, footprints, or any DNA. The house was cleared, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had been in there. That night, she decided she couldn't return home. She stayed with Jordan until her parents returned. Months later, Emily learned from a neighbor that a man had been seen lurking around the neighborhood during the summer. No one had any concrete information, and no one knew his identity. What scared her most wasn't just that someone had been in her house, watching her. It was the complete absence of any explanation, the way he vanished into nothingness each time he was confronted. Years passed, but Emily never stayed alone in a house again. Even in daylight, she would feel uneasy in quiet rooms, her mind instinctively scanning for shadows that weren't there. The thought of being watched had etched itself into her psyche, and she carried that fear everywhere. She would later read about similar cases in small towns, reports of people being stalked inside their own homes with no evidence left behind. But no explanation ever satisfied the dread she felt. Then came the most unsettling part. One evening, Emily received a text from an unknown number. The message was simple: "I see you." She didn't reply. She never called the police. She simply moved, changed numbers, and altered routines. Yet she knew, deep down, that somewhere the same faceless watcher was still out there waiting for the quietest moment to return. Story the end. I parked my car on the side of the rural highway, the headlights cutting a thin path through the fog. I had been driving for hours, coming back from a client meeting in Detroit, and decided to take the shortcut through the country roads. The GPS insisted it would save me 20 minutes, but the thick night fog made me second-guess that decision. Trees pressed close to the asphalt on either side, their branches scraping the sides of the car in a whisper of movement I could almost convince myself was wind. I saw it first as a shadow on the shoulder, a man standing motionless beside an abandoned mailbox. He was tall, thin, wearing a dark coat, and holding something in his hands. As I drove closer, the dim glow of my headlights reflected off what I thought was a lantern. Or maybe a bottle. The road was narrow, and instinct told me to slow down, but curiosity, or some darker part of my mind, kept me moving. He raised an arm as if signaling me to stop. My heart thumped. I slowed, rolled the window halfway down. "You need help?" I called out. No answer. He just stood there, still, unmoving, the fog curling around him like smoke. Then he pointed down the road, away from me, into the darkness where the trees crowded closer. Something about his posture, the unnatural stillness, made my chest tighten. I shook my head, rolled up the window, and started to drive past him, planning to call the sheriff if necessary. That's when I realized, as I passed, his shadow didn't stay beside the mailbox. It stretched across the road, and in that instant, the car headlights caught his face, pale, hollow-eyed, expressionless. My foot slammed the brake. The car fishtailed. I skidded to the shoulder, engine screaming, tires spitting gravel. The figure was gone. No mailbox, no man, nothing but fog. I sat frozen, hand shaking on the wheel, wondering if fatigue had conjured him. A deer? A drunk hitchhiker? I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. I finally managed to pull back onto the road and continued, gripping the steering wheel as though it might anchor me from falling into some unseen nightmare. The fog seemed thicker now, pressing in on the headlights, muting every sound except my own ragged breathing and the engine's growl. About 20 minutes later, I saw a small, weathered gas station glowing dimly ahead. Relief flooded me. I pulled in, the gravel crunching under my tires, and parked near the front door. The station looked deserted. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. Dust clung to the shelves, and the fluorescent lights flickered weakly. I was about to turn and leave when I noticed the man behind the counter. Or rather, the space behind the counter. Empty. I frowned. "Hello?" My voice echoed. No answer. I walked closer, trying the register. It was locked. A chill ran down my spine. I turned around. In the reflection of the dusty window, I saw him, the tall man standing just behind me, the same pale, hollow-eyed face. My stomach dropped. I spun around. Nothing. The door I had entered was still there. Empty. My hand shook as I reached for my phone. No signal. I cursed under my breath. I stepped back outside, and the car was gone. My headlights, the fog, the gravel, nothing remained. My heart jumped. Had I left it running, or had I been dreaming? I ran along the shoulder, calling for help. That's when I noticed footprints in the mud. Not mine. Tall, thin, and oddly precise. They led into the fog, deeper down the highway, away from the gas station. Against my better judgment, I followed. Every step I took was muffled by the mist. The air grew colder, sharper, like it was slicing through my lungs. I came upon an old bridge spanning a creek. Rusted metal rails groaned in the wind. The footprints ended in the middle of the bridge. I froze. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear something. A faint humming, low, melodic, impossible to locate. My instincts screamed at me to run back, but I was rooted in place, my eyes scanning the darkness. And then I saw him, not standing but kneeling on the center span of the bridge, head down, humming. As I stepped closer, I noticed something glinting in the moonlight. My car keys. And next to them, my wallet. A wave of nausea hit me. I tried to reach for them, but the figure lifted its head. The hollow eyes met mine. The humming stopped. Silence fell over the creek. My legs refused to move. The air around him seemed to pulse, a low vibration I could feel in my chest. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. His voice was layered, like multiple voices at once coming from the same thin lips. I stumbled backward. Who are you?" My voice cracked. The man tilted his head, almost curiously. "I've been waiting." Then he smiled. Not a human smile, but a slit of darkness where a mouth should have been. And the fog shifted. Around him, shadows elongated and took form. Figures emerged, tall, thin, silent, all staring at me with empty eyes. They moved closer, gliding over the bridge without sound. I turned and ran. I don't know why I wasn't frozen in place. My legs carried me over the gravel, past the gas station, through the trees. Behind me, I could hear them gliding up, almost singing softly, a sound like broken glass and wind chimes. I didn't stop until I reached a paved road. By then, the fog had lifted. The night was still, quiet, normal. My car was parked at the edge of the road, keys in the ignition, engine cold. The man, the figures, the footprints, they were gone. I never took that shortcut again. Weeks later, I learned that stretch of highway had been closed decades ago due to a series of disappearances. Travelers would vanish at night. No bodies were ever found. Locals said the fog swallowed them. I never reported what happened. Who would believe it? But sometimes, when driving late at night on the highway, I think I see a pale figure by the roadside, pointing. And when I glance back, just for a second, the shadows around him stretch, waiting. Story the end. The Landon house sat perched at the end of Pine Grove Road, its white wood siding peeling, shutters sagging from decades of neglect. When Emma Peterson and her friend Jonah Marsden drove up to it that Saturday afternoon, their car's headlights fell on the rust-spattered mailbox with the faded name Landon, the overgrown yard choking the path to the front porch. Emma clicked the car door shut and shivered, not because of the fall wind, but because of the hush. There were no birds, no rustle of leaves. Even though the late afternoon sun still held warmth, the dark windows of the house felt like eyes emptying with malevolence. "Are we really going in here?" Jonah asked, his tone half joking. He tried to smile, but the corners of his mouth didn't lift far enough. Emma didn't answer. She hoisted her backpack, the small flashlight peeking from its side pocket, and strode across the cracked driveway. The goal was simple: record a video for their Urban Legends channel on YouTube. They had heard about the Landon house's horror stories, how years ago the family had vanished. No bodies, no note, just silence. Emma thought it would be great content. She thought it would be thrilling. Neither of them were fully prepared for what they found. The front door was unlocked. It swung open with a low groan. Dust motes danced in the beam of their flashlight. The air smelled of damp decay, old wood, and something faintly metallic. Emma hit record on her phone. The lens picked up the canted chandelier, the tattered curtains, the houseplant's dead vines creeping like fingers across a low table. "Welcome to the Landon house," Emma whispered, putting on a calm voice. Jonah chuckled nervously and stepped inside. The door shut behind them with a click that echoed in the empty foyer. "All right," Emma said aloud. "We're doing this for real." They walked into the living room. The old family photos hung askew on the wall, sepia-toned, showing the Landon family, mother, father, 2 young children. Their faces were bright in the photographs, smiles frozen in time. But in the house, the photographs looked wrong. The eyes of the people seemed to follow, as though aware of the intruders. Jonah aimed his flashlight at the chimney, where someone had scrawled "Gone but not forgotten" in soot across the bricks. "Well, that's ominous," he muttered. Suddenly, the temperature dropped. Emma rubbed her arms. "Did you feel that?" "Yeah," Jonah whispered. "It's freezing inside." They continued into the dining room. A long mahogany table with chairs leaned askew, one chair tipped farther than the others. On the table lay a porcelain doll, cracked, its glassy eyes missing, the mouth cracked open slightly as though frozen in a scream. "What the hell is this?" Emma asked. Jonah crouched. "Looks like a child's toy, from back when the Landons lived here." Emma's flashlight swung to a sideboard. On it sat a wooden music box. Jonah wound it. The gear clicked, and then it played a slow, off-tune lullaby. As the tune began, a single note cracked as though the spring was broken. The candle holder at the center of the table rattled, although there was no breeze. Jonah jumped to his feet. "Okay, that's enough music for me." Emma closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, she saw something move at the corner of the hallway. A faint silhouette, pale, something small. She gasped. "Did you see that?" she asked. He nodded, shining his light down the corridor, but nothing was visible. Only darkness. "Maybe a cat," Jonah said, though his voice lacked conviction. Emma swallowed. "Let's check the upstairs." They ascended the narrow staircase. The wood creaked under their feet. On the second-floor landing lay a small pair of tiny shoes, polished black leather, size maybe 5, perfectly preserved. Jonah crouched and picked them up. "Why are child shoes here?" he asked. Emma shined the flashlight across the hall. 2 doors, both closed. The left had a broken handle, the right looked intact. Emma turned toward the left door. It opened easily. The room was pale blue, decorated once for a child. The curtains hung limp, the bed half collapsed. On the wall, someone had drawn with charcoal. A girl's silhouette holding hands with something tall. Text beneath reading, "Come home, Daddy." Emma's throat tightened. She quickly snapped a photo. "This house was definitely lived in by children," she said. "We have to find out what happened." They went into the right room. That one seemed like the parents' bedroom. A large dresser with mirror, cracked. The glass shimmered in the flashlight as though breathing. On the bedside table sat a framed photo. Same family as downstairs. The father, a tall man with kind eyes. The mother, slender and preternaturally still. The children, 1 boy, 1 girl. They all looked oddly uncomfortable, stiff. Jonah shone the light toward the far corner. There, under a heavy white sheet, was something bulging. He walked closer and tugged the sheet. Beneath was a mattress, but tucked underneath the mattress was something. A shoe like the ones upstairs, but smaller. Jonah pulled it out. The little keychain with the word Molly lay in the dust. The air in the room felt heavy, like pressure building. A low bang echoed downstairs. They froze. Emma's heart hammered. What was that? Maybe the front door, Jonah said, but they both knew the house had only one opening there, and they'd seated themselves upstairs. The silence returned, pregnant. We should go down, Emma whispered. I don't like this. They started descending. Halfway down the stairs, the power flickered, though strictly speaking there was no power. The daylight outside dimmed all of a sudden, as though clouds swallowed the sun. Jonah's flashlight flickered. Emma's phone recorded, but low battery icon blinked. At the bottom of the stairs they paused. The front door, standing open. They hadn't closed it. Emma's stomach lurched. They must have forgotten. But the wind outside was still, and the door opened outward, which meant if someone had pushed it, there'd be movement across the threshold. They stepped into the living room. The doll from the dining table wasn't there. The table was empty. The porcelain figure gone. Emma gasped. Where did the doll go? Jonah aimed his flashlight across the room. On the floor near the fireplace lay the doll. Its eyes looked blank. The doll's mouth more open than before, as though screaming. He stepped closer, bent down, reached, and picked it up. Okay, this is creeping me out. A voice, quiet, childish, nearly a whisper, said, Play with me. They both jerked up. The voice echoed, soft yet clear from somewhere. Emma's eyes darted to the hallway where the child's room door stood closed. The breath in her lungs froze. Did you hear that? She pointed. Jonah nodded, voice shaking. We leave. Now. They backed toward the stairs. Behind them came another whisper, more urgent. Daddy's coming home. They ran, up the stairs. Emma's phone recorded, but the light of the hallway seemed to morph. Shadows shifting where none should be. At the children's room door, something pressed lightly from inside. They saw a faint outline of a small handprint on the glass panel of the door. Jonah flung the door open. Empty room. The shoes on the floor. The charcoal silhouette on the wall. But now it seemed darker. The bed shape had shifted. The curtain moved slightly, though the window was shut. They fled into the parents' room. Emma grabbed the keychain, the small shoe, shoved it in her pocket. Jonah dashed into the closet, only to find it stuffed with child-sized clothes, dozens of them, all identical, all clean, though the rest of the house was decayed. Emma's breath caught as she counted. 10 dresses, 8 shirts, 6 pairs of pants, all tiny sizes. She brushed past a hanger, and something skittered behind the clothes. She swung the flashlight. Nothing visible. But the closet door slammed shut behind them. The air in the small space condensed with breath. Emma's phone vibrated. The voice again, louder. Daddy's home, she screamed. Jonah kicked at the door. It jolted open. They spilled out into the room. He grabbed Emma's arm. We go now. They raced down the stairs, reached the foyer. The front door was gone. In its place was a black void, like the door ripped away, revealing nothing but darkness inside. Outside the porch, the overgrowth had advanced, vines crawling over railings, the ground shifted like breathing. They saw footprints leading from the steps away into thick brush toward the woods. The footprints were small, child-size. Emma screamed, pointing. Those tracks! They turned to run, but the hallway behind them grew longer. A distant crying, again childlike, echoed. Emma stumbled. Jonah helped her up. They reached the door frame, the void still there. Jonah touched the blackness. His hand vanished slightly into it as though entering a hole in heat. He pulled back. You saw that, right? She nodded, tears running. Let's go. They sprinted outside into daylight. The air felt normal again to the car, threw bags in, slammed the doors. Emma fumbled with the key. It jammed. Her phone beeped. Low battery. The engine turned over. They peeled away from Pine Grove Road. As they passed the Landon house from the street view, it looked normal again. Door closed, curtains drawn. The sign on the mailbox read, Landon, clearly, no rust. The yard looked trimmed, no vines. Emma squinted. Had they imagined the tracks? They didn't stop driving until they were back in town. They sat in the car, shaken. Jonah opened the video. Parts were missed as though the phone had recorded dark frames. At one point, the video showed an extra figure standing in the doorway of the dining room, tall, dark, faceless. They both saw it when reviewing. They swore not to ever show the video publicly. But Emma couldn't sleep for nights afterwards. She dreamt of small feet climbing stairs, lullabies playing, faint voices whispering, "Daddy's home." She would open her eyes at 3:14 a.m. exactly. Wherever her clock lay, it always read 3:14. Then came the phone call. It was midnight. Jonah's phone lit up. An unknown number. He answered. A childish giggle. Static. Then a breath and a whisper. "Come home, Daddy." He dropped his phone. Emma hurried across the room. "Our channel?" she asked. Jonah shook his head. "No, I hung up. We blocked the number." But next morning there was a letter slid under Emma's door. No envelope, just white sheet. Her name typed Emma Peterson. Inside, one line. "The dolls remember." She crumpled it. Jonah arrived early. Together they compared notes, missing videos, weird timing, the call, the message. And then they decided, erase everything. Delete the footage. Discard the keychain and shoe toy. Never return to the house. Weeks passed. Emma thought the nightmare was over. One evening she visited her parents' house. In the living room, on the side table, was the porcelain doll. Cracked glass eyes, mouth open. She screamed. The doll had never been there before. It bore a name, Molly, etched softly into the base. Jonah rushed over when she called. They looked around. No one else had been in the room. No delivery, no theft. The doll was not theirs. They placed it in the garage, then the curb, then threw it away. Next day, it was back in the living room again. They panicked. Emma deleted their YouTube channel. She changed her number. Jonah moved out of his apartment for a while. Still, the phone calls came at 3:14 a.m. every night. The static, the giggle, the whisper, "Play with me." On such a night, Emma awoke to the faint sound of the doll's music box playing upstairs. She sat upright, heart drawn tight. She flicked on her bedside lamp. The door to her room slowly creaked open. A small shadow stood there, a child. She couldn't see its face, only the outline. Its mouth moved. Silence then. "Daddy came home." She was frozen. The child stepped off the threshold and into the room. Emma flung a nearby pillow and it hit the child. The figure disappeared. The doll's tune stopped. The light flickered. She called Jonah. He came over and they looked at the doll. It lay on her bed, music box open. The doll's glass eyes were staring back. One eye cracked. They filed a police report. The officers found no evidence of trespassing. They left. Days later, Emma received a text from Jonah. Found something. He sent a photo. Inside a hidden attic of his new room, there were countless children's toys, dresses, small shoes, all identical to the ones in the closet at the Landon house. The closet door there had said, "Come home, Daddy." Now the dress among the toys bore the name Molly Peterson. She stared at the photo and the letters blurred. Then she heard her phone beep. Another message, "See you soon." The house on Pine Grove Road stood silent still. They never returned. But the house had returned to them. Late one evening, Emma knocked on her basement door. She heard whispering. She raced down the stairs, found the door at the back ironically open. She flicked the light. The basement was carpeted with children's laughter on the walls, on the wallpaper, tiny handprints, and child-sized footprints in the flour dust on the floor, leading toward a darkened corner by the furnace. She ran upstairs and out of the house into the street. She watched across the yard. A small figure, barefoot, ran across the lawn, disappeared into the street. The street lamp flickered out. Jonah vanished 2 weeks later. One day he left his apartment and no one saw him. No trace. No note. Just gone. The last message he sent to Emma, "He's here." Police found his car parked outside the Landon house. On the front seat, the keychain with the word Molly. No Jonah. Emma, now alone and terrified, moved across the country, but she would wake in the night to the lullaby from her phone's speaker, though her phone was off, and at exactly 3:14 a.m. the door to her closet would creak open, and she'd see the same small shadowish form standing just inside, dark and silent. She tried to live, tried to forget, but in every reflective surface she saw faint handprints, child-size, like someone had reached out from behind, and the whisper that followed her, "Daddy's home." Story the end. I arrived in Jasper Falls, an unassuming little town nestled between the rolling hills and dense pine forest of northern Vermont on a Wednesday afternoon. It wasn't on the map for most travelers, but I'd been assigned by my magazine to cover rural redevelopment, how small towns were reinventing themselves after economic shifts. The town looked ideal. Quiet, Tree-lined avenues, wooden clapboard houses painted in gentle pastel hues, and the kind of fountain in the park that you might think came out of a picture book. I rented a small room at the Jasper Falls Inn, run by an older woman named Martha, who greeted me at the door with a warm smile and a bowl of fresh blueberries from her garden. She pointed out the large old library across the street, the town hall next door, and the charming cafe down the way that served hearty breakfasts. I understood the assignment, not just the rooftop solar panels and the farmers markets, but the stories behind the stories. I checked into my room, placed my bag on the ruffled quilt, and walked through the town until dusk. A few shop fronts were shuttered. I made mental notes of how redevelopment efforts seemed to be in early stages here. I stopped at the cafe for dinner. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, steamed carrots, and chatted with the cafe owner, a friendly man named Luke. He told me how Jasper Falls used to rely on logging and then lost its mills 50 years ago. So many people left. Now, a handful of craftspeople and newcomers were moving in, trying to resurrect the place. He asked what brought me here, and I told him I was documenting the transition. He nodded, smiled, and said, "You know, it's quiet here, but sometimes too quiet." I nodded, didn't push. The phrase stuck with me later. That night, I couldn't sleep well. The walls of the inn seemed thin. I thought I heard footfalls in the corridor outside at odd hours. I chalked it up to old buildings settling or someone returning late from town. In the morning, I woke early and decided to walk into the bordering forest, grab some photos of the pines and creek, maybe talk to a logger or two. I asked Martha where I might find someone working the woods. She paused when I asked, her brow creasing, then said softly, "You might try out by Mill Creek Trail, but be careful. Those woods aren't like the ones further south. They're older." I thought it sounded like a friendly warning. I left the inn, camera in hand, and drove about 8 minutes to the trailhead, a narrow dirt lane leading into thick forest. Leaves were just beginning to turn, gold, ochre, deep green. I felt peaceful. As I hiked along, I heard the steady rush of water and soon came upon the stream. I set up my tripod, took some test shots, and as I reviewed the images on my LCD, something on the opposite bank caught my eye. A pale face, peering through the trees, barely visible. I furrowed my brow, zoomed in. It looked like a woman's face, expression blank, watching me. I felt a shiver race down my spine. I raised my camera again to shoot, but when the image displayed, the face was gone. I lowered the camera, scanned the forest opposite. Nothing. No path. No sign of movement, just trees. I stepped closer to the bank to take a better shot, and a twig snapped behind me. I spun around, heart pounding. No one, only the hush of the forest. I told myself it was an animal or maybe a trick of light. I stayed for a while, took more photos, and then made my way back to town. On returning to the inn, I made small talk with Martha, mentioned how lovely the forest was. She nodded. Then she asked casually, "You didn't feel, did you? Someone watching you?" I laughed. "Maybe," I said. "I thought I saw a face." She didn't say anything further. That afternoon, I went into the library to search local records. It was a large wooden room, high ceilings, dark shelves, old books. I asked the librarian, a quiet younger woman named Alice, if there were any historical accounts of old logging accidents or unexplained events around the forest. She hesitated, then led me to a back section with brittle newspapers stacked in boxes. I leafed through one from October 1925, logging disaster at Mill Creek, 5 workers crushed by falling tree. Another read, search launched for missing woman Martha Hunter, last seen near Mill Creek Trail, September 8, 1953. The article described how Martha, age 32, had gone into the forest alone to pick mushrooms. She never returned. Search parties found only her hat hanging from a tree branch, no body. I shivered. I snapped a photo of the clipping. I asked Alice about it. She looked at the photo and said quietly, "Some people say she's still around, out there, watching." I chalked it up to folklore, thanked her, and left. That night I heard the footfalls again, this time louder. I lay still in bed, straining to hear. At about 2 a.m. there came a scratching at my door. I held my breath. Then it stopped. I said nothing, hugged the covers, and somewhere in the distance an owl hooted. I finally drifted into uneasy sleep. The next morning I went back to the cafe. Luke greeted me. I mentioned the noise. He said, "Old inns will do that, but if you hear scratching outside your door, just tell Martha. It's old wiring, animals." Nothing else. I nodded, but deep down I wondered. Later that day, I drove to a small woodworking shop at the edge of town. A man named Harris ran it. I introduced myself, asked him about logging around Mill Creek. He sighed and said the forest had been logged decades ago. Very few active operations remained. He handed me a photograph of a group of loggers from the 1930s, Mill Creek site. I looked at the photo. There was a woman in the back row, barely smiling, somewhat out of place, long dress, gloves. He said, "That's Martha Hunter. She used to hang around here." My heart raced. I recalled the face I saw in my photo. Could it be her? I showed him the photo I took at the bank. He studied it, shrugged. Trees play tricks. The light, shadows. I forced a smile. Maybe. Later in the afternoon, I took more photos of the town, the cafe, the park fountain, the log cabin-style cottages. I posted some for work, jotting notes. As dusk fell, I drove back to the inn, noticing the forest mouths at the horizon behind the houses. The sky turned deep blue, the pines pinkish in the fading light. I parked, carried my bag inside. Before I climbed the stairs, I heard that face again, a whisper of breath right behind me. I turned quickly. No one. My heart thumped. Upstairs, I found my room cold. I pulled the quilt tighter around me and tried to sleep. But I dreamed of being back at Mill Creek, hearing whispering voices, the water turning black, a pale woman emerging from the trees and staring at me. I woke, soaked in sweat. The clock read 3:17 a.m. The scratching was louder this time, on the other side of my door. I held my breath. Slowly a knock, one knock, then a soft nudge. I wanted to scream but couldn't. After a moment, it stopped. I got out of bed, unlocked the door, peered into the corridor. Nothing, but the air smelled of damp wood and something faintly like mushrooms. The next morning, I confronted Martha. "There's something strange going on," I said. She didn't flinch. She leaned closer and said quietly, "You saw her, didn't you?" My throat tightened. I nodded. She looked away, then back. "Just, you need to leave the trail after dark." That was all. I wrote in my journal that morning how the assignment seemed to have shifted. Maybe I wasn't just covering redevelopment. Maybe I was poking into something old. I drove back to Mill Creek with more cautious equipment, a flashlight, backup batteries, a long lens. I arrived midday, sunlight streaming. Near the bank opposite where I had seen the face, I found something odd. A hat, old, moth-eaten, caught on a low branch, slightly off the trail. It looked vintage. I took a photo. The hat's ribbon was faded. My heart pounded. The article said Martha Hunter's hat had been found hanging from a branch. Could this be it? I brought the hat back to the town museum, found the curator, a man named Winslow. He gazed at it, examined the ribbon. "This is early 1950s manufacture," he murmured. "Matches records." I felt cold. He added, "The trail where it was found has since been closed for logging, but not for hikers. Most people avoid it after dusk, say they hear whispering." I asked him if there were any records of sightings. He answered, "Yes. Over decades, local kids tell of seeing a pale woman standing in the woods, not moving. They say she wants you to leave." I snapped more pictures of the hat, arranged interviews with locals who said, "We don't go into the woods after 8, not alone." I asked one older man in a bar about it. He told me, "My cousin's friend disappeared near Mill Creek in 78. They found her footprints, stopped at a stream, then gone." I felt uneasy. I thought perhaps I was chasing folklore. But the energy in the town felt altered when the subject came up. Hushed voices, quick glances at the windows, people changing the subject. An evening came where I decided to test the story, go into the woods at dusk, photograph the location of the hat. I left the inn at 5:30. The forest was shifting, shadows elongated, the undergrowth deepened. I walked toward the bank, camera in hand. Soon the air cooled sharply. I reached the spot where the branch held the hat. I set tripod, framed the shot. The stream gurgled. Then, just at twilight, I heard a splash across the water. I turned slowly, a pale blur at the tree line opposite. My heart hammered. I clicked the shutter. The blur disappeared. The hairs on my neck stood upright. I paused. My flashlight flickered once. The forest was silent. I looked up at the canopy. The branches seemed to twist like reaching arms in the gloom. I argued with myself. Logical explanations. Deer. Light. But the sense of being watched overwhelmed me. I decided to go back to town early. On the path back, I heard footsteps ahead, crunching leaves. I stopped. They stopped. I pointed the flashlight ahead. Nothing. I continued slowly, hearing the same steps again, synchronizing with mine, but 20 feet ahead, then 20 feet behind. I quickened pace until the path joined the lane to my car. I jumped into the vehicle. Only then did I look back. The dark woods glowed faintly in moonlight, no figure visible. I locked the doors, drove away. Back in my room, I tried to sleep, but the scratching resumed. At 2 a.m., a whisper in my ear, "Go." I sat upright. The door creaked. Something cold brushed the bottom of the bed. I flicked on the bedside lamp. Nothing. But the air smelled of mushrooms again. I vomited. I dialed Luke from my room and asked him if he knew something about the trail after dark. He said, "You need to leave that place. Now." I asked why. He just said, "Just get out." I realized then I had become part of the story. Not an outside observer, but someone entangled. I drove out of Jasper Falls the next morning. I left my equipment at the inn, grabbed my bag, told Martha I was leaving earlier than planned. She nodded without surprise. "Good," she said. "Better safe." I didn't cry goodbye. I just started the car and left. Weeks later, at home in Connecticut, I reviewed my photos for an article. Among them, the shot I took of the bank. I zoomed in, and there, hiding just beyond a tree trunk, a pale face. Eyes fixed on me, the same vague features I had glimpsed. I shivered. Then I opened another photo, the one I took after dark on the trail. I hadn't noticed it then, but there at the edge of the frame was a figure. Slender, tall, slight movement blur. And worst, the hat, perched on the branch, impossibly against logic. I traced the timeline in my head, then an email arrived. Subject line, "About your stay." From Martha. I opened it. It read, "Thank you for visiting Jasper Falls. You may publish the redevelopment piece. The forest, though, truly best avoided after dusk. The woods remember. Take care." I stared at my screen. My blood ran cold. I deleted the email. I sent my article to the editor without the horror thread. I didn't tell him about the pale face, the hearing footsteps, the whisper. I didn't include the part about the hat or the missing woman. I could see the rise in views, the simple, safe piece about community revival. But I know what I encountered. I know what the forest holds. And sometimes at night I wake up, convinced I hear scratching on the window. My mind tells me it's the wind. My heart tells me it's the forest calling. Story, the end. The town of Ravensbrook, Maine, had always been small and quiet, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, and strangers drew immediate suspicion. But the one thing that unsettled even lifelong residents was the old Whitmore Asylum, perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. Closed since the early 1960s after a series of unexplained patient disappearances, the building had been abandoned for decades. Locals claimed the asylum was cursed, though none could explain why. Alex Monroe, a 30-year-old investigative journalist from Boston, didn't believe in curses. He had a reputation for debunking myths and urban legends. So when he heard about Whitmore Asylum, he knew he had his next story, an overnight stay in the abandoned building, capturing footage and recording the truth behind the legend. He arrived just before sunset, the sky heavy with clouds, waves crashing violently against the cliffs below. The asylum loomed before him, its windows broken, doors chained, paint flaking off the walls like dried skin. He parked his car, grabbed his camera gear, and approached the main entrance. The chain across the doors was rusted, but with some effort he managed to pry it open. Inside, the air was thick with mildew, the scent of decay pervasive. Rusted wheelchairs, broken beds, and peeling wallpaper filled the corridors. Alex set up his cameras, narrating for his documentary. He explored patient rooms, reading old journals left behind, accounts of hallucinations, paranoia, voices that spoke in the night. At first, nothing unusual happened, but as darkness fell, a subtle shift occurred. The corridors seemed longer, the shadows deeper. In the corner of his eye, he thought he saw movement, a fleeting glimpse of a figure in the distance. He spun around, but the hallway was empty. He brushed it off as imagination and continued filming. Around 11:30 p.m., he set up a camera in the main hall, the old reception area. It was here that he heard the first whisper, soft, low, almost melodic, calling his name. "Alex." He froze, heart racing. The whisper came again, closer this time. He shone his flashlight across the hall. Empty. He turned back to his camera feed. On the monitor, a figure had appeared, a pale man in a tattered uniform, standing near the far wall, completely still, eyes fixed on the camera. Alex felt a chill run down his spine. He stepped toward the figure. "Who's there?" he called out. The figure didn't move. He advanced another step, and the man tilted his head unnaturally, almost inhumanly. Then it vanished. Panicked, Alex moved to leave the hall, but the corridor behind him seemed longer than before, stretching impossibly into darkness. Footsteps echoed behind him, slow, deliberate, following him. He spun around, flashlight trembling, but nothing was there. He ran toward the main exit, only to find the doors locked. The chains he had pried open were now intact, gleaming as if new. He tried to break them with his shoulder, but they held fast. Behind him, a soft scratching sound grew louder, like fingernails on metal. Alex's camera, still recording, captured everything. On the live feed, dozens of pale faces appeared along the walls, pressed against the plaster, their mouths opening in silent screams. They didn't move, yet their eyes followed him. He could feel them watching. A whisper came directly in his ear. "Stay." He bolted toward the stairs, ascending toward the second floor. The steps groaned under his weight, but he felt lighter, almost as if gravity was shifting around him. At the top, the hallway stretched endlessly, lined with patient rooms. Doors opened and closed on their own. Shadows twisted along the walls. In one room, he glimpsed a figure hunched over a bed. Its head lifted slowly, blank, featureless, except for two glowing eyes. Alex stumbled backward, tripping over a loose floorboard. The figure glided toward him silently, its movements unnatural, impossible. He ran down the stairs toward the lobby. The whispering had grown into a chorus, dozens of voices calling his name, chanting. The reception desk was now occupied by a cluster of pale figures, their faces pressed against the wood, staring unmoving. Alex grabbed the front door again, but it refused to budge. Behind him, the figures advanced slowly, deliberately, their whispers now words he could understand. "Join us. Forever. Stay." He screamed and slammed his shoulder into the door. It gave way this time, and he tumbled out into the night, rain lashing against him, wind howling. He ran down the cliffside path toward his car, never looking back. When he reached it, the headlights revealed nothing unusual, just the dark silhouette of the asylum against the stormy sky. But when he started the engine and glanced in the rearview mirror, he saw dozens of pale faces staring from the asylum windows, even on the upper floors. They didn't move, didn't blink. They just watched. Alex left Hartsville that night, vowing never to return. But the footage he captured told another story. The cameras had recorded everything he claimed. The endless hallways, the pale figures, the whispered names. And in the final frames, as he fled through the lobby, one figure stepped forward. A man in a tattered uniform, his face blank, staring directly at the camera. Weeks later, Alex noticed something disturbing. In photographs taken at his apartment, shadows appeared that weren't there before. On some nights, he swore he could hear whispering outside his window. And sometimes, in the corner of his vision, he glimpsed a pale face watching. He moved cities, he changed jobs, he tried to forget. But the whispers followed him. Occasionally, late at night, he would hear a faint melodic voice calling his name. "Alex, come, stay." And sometimes when he looked in the mirror, just for a fraction of a second, he saw eyes staring back that weren't his own. Story the end. I had been driving through rural Pennsylvania in late October, the kind of empty roads where the trees stretch so high they blot out the sun and the wind whistles through the branches like something alive. My car broke down just past a bend, miles from the nearest gas station or house. My phone had no service. I cursed quietly to myself, kicking the tire, and then spotted a dim light flickering through the woods to my left. A house, or something that looked like one, squatted at the edge of a field. Its paint was peeling, the porch sagging, but the light suggested someone was home. I approached, hoping to ask for help. The door opened before I even knocked. A woman stood there, pale, thin, mid-40s, wearing a faded cardigan. She smiled tightly. "You need help? Come inside, come inside." Her voice was soft, but it carried a strange edge, like it had been heard by someone who shouldn't have heard it. Inside, the house was warm, smelling faintly of cinnamon and cleaning products, but the walls were lined with dozens of photographs. Family photos, children smiling, adults laughing. But all of the children had the same face. Small, round, dark eyes staring directly at me, each frame capturing them in a frozen smile. I tried to shake off the unease. Maybe she was obsessed with her child. She offered me coffee. I accepted. "Car trouble?" she asked. I explained. She nodded knowingly. "That happens a lot out there. Those roads, not safe." She poured the coffee. Steam rose, but I noticed the mug was cracked, the edges chipped, as if it had been repaired countless times. We sat at the table. I tried to make small talk, but she kept glancing at the hallway behind me. I followed her gaze. The hallway was dark, narrow, lined with more photographs, smaller, more recent ones. Children again, the same child's face in every photo. My stomach churned. I I should get back to my car, I said, attempting to stand. You can't go yet, she said softly. Her smile widened unnaturally. You promised to stay. I froze. Before I could react, I heard a soft shuffle behind me. The hallway light flickered. I turned slowly. A small child, maybe 8 years old, stood there, pale skin, dark eyes. She didn't speak, just stared. But her presence was wrong, like something had been hollowed out inside her. I felt my chest tighten. The woman stood and said, Go ahead, she just wants to play. She gestured at the child. Her eyes held a glimmer of pride, malice. I couldn't tell. I backed toward the door. The child moved closer, sliding her feet across the floor silently. I reached for the doorknob. It wouldn't turn. I yanked again. Stuck. The woman laughed softly, almost tenderly. Don't be afraid, she said. She's only lonely. Lonely. The word echoed, but the sound that followed wasn't just a child's voice. A chorus of whispers came from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Stay, stay, stay. The air thickened, pressing against my lungs. I dropped to the floor, trying to push the door open, and my eyes caught something in the corner of the room. A mirror. The reflection wasn't right. Behind me, the child multiplied. There were dozens now, all wearing the same frozen expression. Their eyes followed me. The woman was gone. The light dimmed. The whispers intensified. I screamed. I don't know how long I struggled. At some point, the room fell silent. I opened my eyes to the morning sun streaming through the front window. The house looked normal again, just a simple, empty house. The photographs were gone. The hallway was dark, but empty. I stumbled outside. My car was gone. I hitchhiked back to the main road, shaken, muttering to myself that I must have passed out, hallucinated. But the memory of those eyes, the same child's face in every frame, stayed with me. Years later, I read a small news piece about a woman in rural Pennsylvania who had been found dead in her home, allegedly killed by her own children. Orphan siblings had vanished years before, and no one could explain how she had survived alone. I recognized the address immediately. It was the same house I had stumbled upon. Since then, every time I drive past empty country roads, I watch the tree line. Sometimes when the sunlight hits just right, I swear I see a small figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching, waiting. And every so often, late at night, I hear a whisper, Come back, we're lonely. Story the end. It was the summer of 2011 when everything went wrong. I was 28, newly married, and full of the kind of optimism that makes you blind to danger. My wife, Lauren, and I had just bought our first home, a small 3-bedroom house on the edge of a quiet suburb in northern Indiana. It was the kind of neighborhood that seemed perfect from the outside. Wide lawns, old oak trees, kids playing in the street until dusk. The kind of place where everyone waved but no one really talked. We moved in on a Saturday morning. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and something faintly metallic that I thought came from the nearby rail yard. Lauren loved the house instantly. The kitchen had old tile counters, and there was a little sunroom out back where she said she'd grow herbs. I loved the garage, a big, detached thing with room for tools and my old Chevy. The first few days were normal enough. We unpacked, met the neighbors, took walks at night. But by the end of that first week, I started noticing things, small things that didn't make sense. It began with the sound. Every night, sometime between 2 and 3 a.m., I'd hear what sounded like someone walking through the gravel path that ran beside the house. Crunch, 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 slow steps, always the same pattern. The first few nights I ignored it, thought maybe it was a raccoon or a cat, but one night I decided to look. I got out of bed, careful not to wake Lauren, and peeked through the blinds. The motion light over the garage was on, but I couldn't see anyone. Just shadows moving across the grass. I waited, listening. The sound stopped. Then, after a moment, I heard it again. Closer this time. Gravel shifting, then nothing. In the morning, I checked outside. The gravel looked undisturbed, no footprints, no tracks. I told myself I was imagining it. A few days later, I noticed the back door was unlocked. Lauren swore she hadn't touched it. We always locked up before bed. Always. I chalked it up to moving stress, to distraction. But it happened again the next night. The third time, I set my phone on video, camera pointed toward the kitchen door. When I checked the footage in the morning, the door opened at 2:47 a.m. The handle turned slowly, like someone trying not to make a sound, and the door swung open just a few inches before closing again. There was no one visible, no sound but the faint creak of the hinges. I told Lauren. She laughed nervously, then stopped when she saw my face. We called the police that afternoon. An officer came, looked around, said there were no signs of forced entry. He told us maybe it was a draft, maybe humidity. Old houses move, he said. I didn't believe him. We changed the locks. I even installed a deadbolt and a camera system. For a week, nothing happened. I started to feel foolish for being paranoid. Then, one night, the motion camera in the garage went off. The footage showed something standing in the far corner of the garage. It wasn't clear, blurry, like the lens couldn't focus, but it was tall, too tall for a person. It stood there for about 10 seconds, unmoving, and then the light cut out. When I checked the garage in the morning, the air smelled awful, like wet soil and something rotting. The smell seemed strongest near the workbench. Beneath it, I found a piece of paper folded into a triangle. It was damp, the ink smeared, but I could make out a few words scrawled in shaky handwriting. Do not look at it. Lauren wanted to leave that day. I convinced her to wait, told her it was probably some sick prank by kids. We just bought the house. I didn't want to run over something stupid. That night, she woke me around 3. There's someone outside, she whispered. I got up, heart pounding, and went to the window. Under the streetlight across the yard, I saw it. A figure. Tall, motionless, its body impossibly thin. Its head tilted slightly, like it was listening. The light flickered once, and when it came back on, it was gone. We packed our things the next day and stayed in a motel. I went back during daylight to grab a few more boxes. As I was leaving, I noticed something carved into the inside of the garage door. Deep, jagged lines forming a single word, stay. I called the police again. They sent another officer. He said it was probably vandals, maybe kids from the nearby high school. He offered to patrol the area at night. I thanked him, but I knew no kids did that. The carving was deep, nearly half an inch into solid wood. It would have taken time, effort. No one in the neighborhood heard a thing. Lauren refused to go back, so I started going alone during the day to finish packing. The house felt different, heavy, like the air itself was thicker. I couldn't explain it. On my last trip, as I was locking the front door, I heard a soft sound behind me, a whisper. My name. I turned around. The hallway was empty. The air felt colder. I said my name out loud, just to hear a voice. The sound came again, closer this time. Eli. My skin crawled. I backed toward the door, fumbling for my keys. I looked down the hall and froze. At the far end, near the open bedroom door, something stood. A shape dark and narrow, like a person, but not. Its arms hung too long, nearly touching the floor. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there. Then its head tilted. Slowly, I ran. Outside, I didn't stop until I reached my truck. I didn't look back. I drove until the house was out of sight. That night, I got a call from my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Hanley. She asked if I'd been home earlier, said she'd seen someone standing in the yard near the garage. When I told her no, she went quiet. Then she said it looked like a man, but wrong somehow. We sold the house 2 months later at a loss. I didn't care. We moved to Indianapolis into an apartment on the 3rd floor. No woods, no gravel path. For a while, life felt normal again, until last winter. It was early December, just after midnight. Snow falling. I was sitting on the couch scrolling my phone when I heard the familiar sound, gravel crunching, except there was no gravel here, just concrete and snow. Lauren came out of the bedroom, pale. You heard that too? She whispered. We both stood still. The sounds stopped. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps on the door. I walked slowly toward it, looked through the peephole, no one there. But as I stared, something moved just beyond the edge of the light, a tall shape retreating down the hall. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty except for a single wet footprint in the snow that had blown in from outside. 3 long toes. We moved again. We don't stay anywhere more than 6 months now. I tell myself it's over, that it can't follow us forever. But sometimes in the middle of the night, I hear the faint crunch of gravel outside, and I know it's found us again. Story the end. I moved to a small town in upstate New York called Ashford to escape the bustle of city life. The The kind of town where everyone waves as you drive past and life moves slow, almost too slow. I found an old farmhouse for a steal, a creaky two-story place that had been empty for decades. The locals gave me vague warnings. Some houses carry memories, son, heavy ones. I brushed it off. I liked quiet. I liked isolation. The first few nights were uneventful, aside from the usual creaks and groans of an old house settling. But then, around the third night, I started hearing a knock on the window in my bedroom. Slow, deliberate, like someone was testing if I was awake. I checked. Nothing. I assumed it was a branch hitting the glass. But the next night, the knock came again, louder. This time, I heard a faint whisper, almost beneath the sound of the wind. Let me in. I froze. My rational brain screamed, crazy, but a cold pit of fear formed in my stomach. I told myself it was a dream, or maybe the wind had been trapped in the eaves. The following morning, I explored the house more thoroughly. In the attic, hidden behind a false wall, I found an old trunk. Inside were letters, journals, and photographs dating back to the 1920s. The journals belonged to a woman named Eleanor Whitman, who had lived there with her husband and young son. As I flipped through, I noticed a pattern of entries becoming increasingly paranoid. Mentions of a man outside watching the house, scratching at the doors and windows, whispering threats to take her son away. The last entry was brief. He came inside last night. I don't know how, but he's here. He won't leave. I'm hiding, but he knows. God help me. I shivered and set the journal down. A chill ran down my spine. Something about the words felt alive. That evening, I heard the knock again. Only this time, I didn't hesitate. I ran to the door. Nothing outside. I checked all the windows. Nothing. But then from the living room, I heard a soft scraping sound, like nails dragging across the floorboards. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously walked toward the noise. The beam landed on the parlor, the same room where I had first seen the shadows in the journal photographs. And there, standing by the fireplace, was a figure. Pale, featureless, just a shadow shaped like a man. It didn't move, just stood as if observing me. I froze, heart hammering. The figure whispered my name. Michael. I bolted upstairs and locked myself in the bedroom. I didn't sleep. I could hear it pacing the first floor, whispers growing louder. You shouldn't have come. You shouldn't have touched the past. The next morning, I called the local historian, a man named Graham, who had studied Ashford's old homes. He listened carefully to my account and nodded gravely. The Whitman house? Yes, it's notorious. There are stories of a presence that lingers. People who investigate it sometimes never leave. Eleanor wasn't the first to disappear. That night, I set up a camera in the parlor. Around midnight, I woke to the unmistakable sound of the piano playing. My old upright, which had been silent for years, was playing notes on its own, a mournful melody. I rushed to the parlor, and the figure was there again, hovering above the keys. Its face, or lack thereof, was inches from mine. I screamed. The figure vanished, but the piano continued to play. I ripped it apart, throwing pieces across the room, but the notes seemed to come from everywhere at once. Days later, I tried to leave town. I packed my car, but when I started the engine, it wouldn't start. I looked up, and in the rearview mirror, I saw him, the shadow figure, standing at the edge of the driveway. I slammed the door and ran into the house. When I looked back, the figure was gone. I stayed in that house for another week, but each night the figure became bolder, appearing in mirrors, whispering through closed doors, moving objects in plain sight. Then, one night, I heard a child's laughter, a small hollow sound echoing through the empty rooms. It wasn't mine. It was from the attic. I climbed the stairs, each step groaning under my weight. At the top, the door to the attic slowly creaked open by itself. Inside, I saw a small boy, pale and shadowed, looking directly at me. He pointed to the trunk and in a voice too soft and distant whispered, "He's waiting." Before I could react, the attic door slammed shut behind me. I ran to the front door, but it wouldn't budge. Every window in the house was sealed, as if the house itself was alive, trapping me inside. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me in every direction. For what felt like hours, I tried every escape, every window, every lock. Nothing worked. Finally exhausted, I collapsed in the living room. And there, sitting in the armchair that had belonged to Eleanor Whitman, was the figure. "You opened the trunk," it said. "You read her words. You cannot leave." I thought of Graham, the historian, the warnings, everything. Panic overtook me. I ran to the attic, desperate to destroy the trunk. I ripped it open and threw the contents into the fireplace. The flames flared wildly, smoke filling the room. I coughed and stepped back. The shadow figure vanished, leaving only silence. I thought I was free. I left Ashford that night, drove until the roads blurred under rain and darkness. I swore never to speak of the house again. But a month later, I received a package at my new apartment, a small, charred notebook. Inside were the same photographs and letters I had found in the attic. On the first page, in smudged ink, was written, "Welcome home." That night, I heard the soft knock on my window. Story the end. The first time it happened, no one really believed her. Emma Larson had just moved into a small house on the outskirts of Cedar Falls, Iowa, a quiet town with too many old trees and not enough streetlights. The realtor had called it charming, though to Emma, the peeling paint and creaking floorboards suggested otherwise. She was used to small, quiet places. She liked to write like the hum of solitude, but she wasn't used to feeling watched. It started with the sounds. Emma would be typing at her old wooden desk in the evenings when she'd hear it. A soft tapping on the walls, almost like fingernails dragging. At first, she assumed it was the old house settling, the wood contracting in the cold autumn nights. But it persisted. Always when she was alone. One evening, she heard the taps coming from the bedroom. Her first thought was rational, probably the wind, maybe the heating vents. But then came the whispering. She froze. It was faint, like someone trying to speak without being heard. Emma. Her heart hammered. She ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, just a precaution, and listened. Silence. The wind rattled the window panes and she laughed nervously, telling herself it was nothing. The next day, she noticed the scratches, small, almost imperceptible lines etched into the bedroom doorframe as if claws had scored it. The scratches didn't look old, but no one else had been in the house yet. She called her friend, Kelly, who laughed and said, "Maybe the house is haunted, like in the movies." Emma forced a laugh but didn't tell her about the whispers. That night, she slept fitfully. Around 2 a.m., she woke to a shadow moving across the room. She froze, eyes wide. The bedroom door, closed when she had gone to bed, was now slightly ajar. Her flashlight trembled in her hand as she approached it. The air felt heavier, colder. She reached for the knob. The whisper came again, unmistakable this time. "Emma!" She stumbled backward, falling into the bed. When she looked again, the door was closed, the scratches on the frame gone. Over the next week, the incidents escalated. Objects moved when she wasn't looking. The kitchen knife she had left on the counter one morning was on the floor that evening, pointing toward the door. The whispers grew louder, forming words she couldn't quite understand. Emma started leaving her bedroom light on, never sleeping alone. Then came the phone calls. Her cell would ring at odd hours, the caller ID blank. She would pick up, only to hear breathing, deep, slow, deliberate. Once, she thought she heard a voice whisper, "I see you." She became paranoid. She changed the locks, installed cameras, bought pepper spray. Still, the whispers followed her. Even through text messages and emails, she felt watched, as if the house itself had eyes. One night, she stayed up until 3 a.m., determined to catch whatever it was. She sat in the living room with her laptop and a flashlight. Around 2:57 a.m., the lights flickered. Then the whispers came, louder, clearer. "You can't leave." Her blood ran cold. The temperature dropped. Her breath turned to mist. She shined her flashlight across the room, and the reflection in the darkened window wasn't hers. A figure stood behind her, tall, thin, faceless. She spun around, nothing. When she looked back at the window, the figure was there again, pressed against the glass, staring. Emma ran to the front door, yanking it open. Outside, the fog had rolled in thick and unnatural, blanketing the yard. She ran to her car and locked the doors, shaking. But when she looked in the rearview mirror, she saw it, standing in the yard, watching her leave. No face, just an emptiness that made her stomach turn. For days, she considered leaving town, selling the house, abandoning everything. But every time she tried, something blocked her. Phone lines dead, car won't start, neighbors acting strangely, as if they knew and were keeping her there. Weeks passed. Emma's sleep became erratic. She began noticing shapes in the corners of rooms, moving just out of sight, shadows that didn't belong. Then she started seeing them in photographs. Grainy images from her security cameras showed figures in her living room when she was at work. Some had faces, Some were faceless. All were watching. One night, Emma woke to find her bedroom door wide open, the knife she had left on the nightstand gone. She heard it, the whisper, right in her ear, "You belong to us." She ran to the living room, turning on every light, calling for help. Her neighbors didn't answer. The streets were empty. That's when she noticed it. The walls themselves were changing. Scratches formed, letters, words. "Don't leave. Don't forget." Her laptop flickered on by itself. On the screen was a video of her sleeping. She screamed, but the laptop refused to close. The whispers now came in multiple voices, overlapping. "We see you. We hear you. You cannot escape." Emma realized the entity, or entities, weren't just haunting the house. They were attached to her wherever she went. Every mirror reflected them. Every shadow was theirs. The air followed her. One morning, Emma's friend Kelly stopped by to check on her. She knocked on the door, but no one answered. When she finally pushed it open, the house was silent. The living room was empty except for a chair facing the window. Emma was gone. On the chair lay her laptop, open. The screen displayed a single image, a photo of Kelly taken from inside the house as she had approached the front door. Behind Kelly, in the reflection of the window, were dozens of faceless figures. Kelly dropped the laptop and screamed, but when she looked around, the house appeared normal. No scratches, no whispers, no one inside. Only the faint fog drifting past the yard, curling like smoke, hiding something just beyond sight. The next day, the house was for sale again. Charming, the realtor said. And inside, in the darkness of the empty rooms, the whispers waited. Story the end.